I were to hire, say, more administrative time. So if I was to hire somebody into the administrative role, what things could they immediately take off my plate? And how much time is that freeing up from me? And yes, maybe you're giving it to somebody who's going to take a little bit longer, but it's off of your plate. It's no longer hours that you have to allot time for. Or in my case, sometimes things would just get behind. I wouldn't be able to keep up with getting the subscription renewals out. I wouldn't be able to keep up with finding time to go to another networking event. So if you do this time audit and can identify things, you are able to then say, okay, this makes sense to hire to this specific role. Hi, and welcome to Accounting with Confidence. My name is Beth Whitworth, and I am talking today about something that I find people seem to struggle with. They struggle with deciding who is the next hire. Who do they need in their business to help them move it forward? So today I'm bringing you a confidence booster. This will be a short episode with a couple of key items that I have learned that help me figure out what's the next step, who is the next person that needs to be on my team to elevate, to relieve stress, to get us moving in the right direction. So a few years ago, it was probably 2020, 2021, I was listening to the Jasmine Star podcast. And she was interviewing with a woman whose name was Teresa Lowe. And she helped people by teaching them how to streamline and scale. That was the name of her podcast. Streamline and scale their teams. And she, by putting together processes, by putting together a really good hiring system and a really good onboarding system. And I was really drawn to what she was saying. So I started listening to her podcast. And like I said, this was back in 2021 when things were a little different in the world. We were in the midst of actually kind of the beginnings of the pandemic. And what was happening was that some people who had things that they had been doing pivoted to start doing some other things because their industry was maybe shut down. So Teresa had put together prior to this a course, and I was able to take that course. And I will tell you that, since that time, she has since gone back to the industry that she was in, and she was in some filming, and she's just really dynamic person. And so shout out to Teresa Lowe. So you can't get her course, but I am going to give her credit for teaching me these two things, these two steps that really help me identify where I need to focus to get someone else on the team. Now, I will say her podcast is probably still out there. You could listen to those episodes, and I listened religiously. She's not still creating new episodes, but Streamlined and Scaled, Teresa Lowe. Her last name is spelled Loe. And I credit her for helping me make some really good decisions in my business. And before that, I will say that I struggled, and maybe you do too, with, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have a lot of work to do, but who should I hire? Who can I afford to hire? Who does it make sense to hire? I can do this stuff faster than if I trained somebody else to do it. So maybe I, hired to some other roles. It was always a struggle. Who was next? And in the accounting industry, it was always one of those things where you felt like you had to have the workload in place in order to hire to that. So if you knew you had work coming, you would want to plan to have somebody in place that could do that work. Well, it doesn't always work that way, and it's not always the best way to hire. So, like I said, I took this course from Teresa and learned two things. The first thing I will say is the creation of your org chart. Now, this is not the titles of people. This is not kind of the wish list. It's the responsibilities. What responsibilities are in your business? And so when I created my org chart, Um, there's me up at the top, and then there was nobody in between. And then there were what I would consider about four areas. And there was like sales and marketing, there was production, which is, getting tax returns done, getting client work done. There was operations, keeping the lights on, getting the bills paid, getting hiring people and getting them into the system and getting all of those types of operational things. And then I also had another section that was my podcast. That has been something that was very important to me that I wanted to make sure that I was doing. And so in this org chart, you're putting in each of those departments the responsibilities. So who's responsible for publishing the podcast? Who's responsible for getting payroll done for clients? Who's responsible for getting the email out every week to your clients so that you have some marketing going on? And so once you define each of those roles, and I kind of did probably something it was Windows, it was whatever their way you could kind of put Post-it notes all over the place. So I had colored sections and I filled in the Post-it notes with the roles, not the titles, not anything but the responsibility. And I did that. And then the next step of this is to go in and put who is currently responsible for those things. Who's currently responsible? And other than in the production area, which for me is getting tax returns done, getting financial statement work done, getting client work done, my name was in most of the boxes. So I could see where, it's all in the podcast stuff. It's a lot of the operations. It's all the sales and marketing. And it was, so a lot of the administrative work, not a lot of production, but a little bit, but I wasn't necessarily the one in charge of that. Well, I take that back. At the time I was taking this course, I was responsible for a lot of that, a lot of that. So when I put this together, it really highlights, okay, some specific areas that you could say, what if I hired to this? What if I took this off my plate? And how Teresa referred to it is that domino person. If you hired this person, they could do all of these things and things would start to fall into place. So it became really apparent from my org chart that I needed to do something to get work off of my plate, not off of anybody on my team's plate. And that was very enlightening. So this org chart was really something that helped drive who my next hire needed to be. So the second thing that I will say you need to do, and what Teresa taught me to do, is you need to do a time audit of where you are spending your time. So especially if there are things that, like me, where I was wearing all the hats for a lot of the areas, go through and spend a week or 2 weeks clearly tracking how you're spending your time on every activity in your business. So for me, it was how much time was I spending managing the team? How much time was I spending doing the internal accounting for the firm? How much time was I spending doing sales, marketing, subscription agreements? How much time was I doing client work? And what client work? Getting very specific. So it's very detailed time audit of yourself. And by doing that, you're going through what admin functions are you doing, what accounting functions, what networking functions, everything that you are doing. And a week is enlightening, but 2 weeks is even better so that you can really identify where you're spending your time. And in conjunction with that org chart, you can see if I were to hire, say, more administrative time. So if I was to hire somebody into the administrative role, what things could they immediately take off my plate? And how much time is that freeing up from me? And yes, maybe you're giving it to somebody who's going to take a little bit longer, but it's off of your plate. It's no longer hours that you have to allot time for. Or in my case, sometimes things would just get behind. I wouldn't be able to keep up with getting the subscription renewals out. I wouldn't be able to keep up with finding time to go to another networking event. So if you do this time audit and can identify things, you are able to then say, okay, this makes sense to hire to this specific role. So what happened when I started using that process where I did the org chart, I did the time audit, and we identified, and this is when I was still going through her course with Teresa, we identified that I needed kind of that second in command, that I was at the top and there was nobody between me and the rest of the team. And so I was managing the team, I was doing all of those pieces and keeping track of the due dates and keeping, I had no management. It was me, and I was management, I was leadership, I was all the things. And so it clearly identified. Now, I will tell you, whenever you're looking at things, when it comes to hiring, we're in a weird environment for hiring. Sometimes it's really hard to find people. Sometimes it's really expensive to find people. Sometimes you just can't find the right people. And that's a whole nother episode on what I do now as far as hiring and where I put my ads and how I express what our firm actually needs. But before I even get to that point, I do this analysis to figure out, who is my domino person? Is it administrative? Is it management? Is it production? Where do we need to find time? Where do we need to put money into someone who can take time off of you so that you can do things to either, free up your time to do less work, meaning you're going to spend time doing your favorite things or with your family or traveling or whatever it is you want to do? Or is it's going to take things off your plate so that you can do more revenue generating things that maybe you're really good at sales and you don't have a lot of time to do the sales, but if you did the sales, you could really grow. Well, if you find the person to take things off your plate, to give you back those hours, that's the goal. So back to 2021, when I did this entire exercise and we determined that I needed a manager. That is when I put the ad out, but I determined what had to come off my plate. And now, as a reminder, we are a 100% remote firm. And we are, 100% part-time firm. We're also 100% remote, but we do permanent part-time. I don't hire 40-hour-a-week people. And I will tell you, I suggest that you start with that model. And I know people say, oh, no, I can't do that. But what made it easy is that I didn't have to try to find 40 hours a week of work for this person. I needed to find 30. And when I looked at my time audit, okay, what things on my list could she immediately take off and would start to add up to 30 hours? And by doing the part-time, I was less worried about having enough hours to fill for that person. And we have we've only hired part-time since I hired Sarah. So I identified, and then I put together my 30, 60, and 90-day kind of onboarding of what I expected her to have done. And that included training, and that included taking over reviewing client work, taking over reviewing client tax returns, taking over managing the due date list. And eventually that was taking over managing the team. So it was not difficult for me to find 30 hours to come off my plate. And by doing those two exercises, I figured out what roles I had to fill and what boxes could I lean into, where if I hired this person, they could take my name out of all of these little boxes. And then also doing that time audit to say, okay, well, what areas do I have that if they came off my plate would free me up to do more of this, or working less in general, or whatever. And for me, I needed to find time to do what I was somewhat passionate about, and that I wanted to keep my podcast going. And Sarah always brings me back around to that whenever I'm struggling to find the time to keep the podcast consistent is she says, that's what you hired me for. That's what you hired me for. So she's still working 30 hours a week, but some weeks it's a little bit more, but it is a little bit, depends on what we have going on. But it was doing that exercise was the best thing I could have done. It showed me exactly who I needed to bring in, what skills, what talents, what things that I hated doing that someone else could do. And not only did that free me up the time, but it also took something away that was really something that I didn't like to do. And I'd procrastinate it, and I would just get kind of in that, not cranky, but a little cranky when you have to do things you don't like, but they have to get done. You kind of don't love it. And it makes you kind of, resist a little bit on getting some work done. So definitely, I would say try these 2 steps. Do an org chart of roles, figure out what you need to, maybe you have no one in that role. So maybe you've got this, sales and marketing that every business needs, and you really don't have anybody, not even you is getting that done. Okay. Well, that might be something that you need to say, okay, I need to hire to that. And then that time audit. Now, the time audit, like I said, is very eye-opening. So, and then I would also say, when you're first starting to decide who, you probably consider if you were hiring somebody for 20 or 30 hours and not 40, and just figure out, if you do your time audit and you're like, if I hired this person, they could take 40 hours off my plate, then okay, then that's definitely worth the investment. But I find that it is easier to budget for and to onboard somebody for a few less hours. So, but that's a different episode as well. So, okay, I hope this helps. This is the 2 things that if you work on that can help you determine who your next hire is. And by determining that, you can then, figure out what skills you're hiring for, what the timeline is, how you will onboard them, how things will come off your plate or someone else's plate onto their plate, all of those things. And so I think it's definitely something that Teresa opened my eyes to. And we revisit this org chart whenever we're making another hire, really any hire, because I need to go in and update those roles. I hope that I'm not on every single one of those little Post-it notes on my chart anymore. So, all right, that's all I have for today. As a reminder, I am here to empower you to build a business that you love. So if you have any subjects that you would like me to talk about, if you have any feedback, leave it on the comments on the YouTube video, or click on fan mail, give me a text message so I can hear what you want to hear about and whether you're, enjoying what I am talking about already. And in the meantime, I hope that you have a fabulous week, and I'll talk to you again soon.